Tax number 1. The urine tax. Ancient Rome, 70 AD. In ancient Rome, urine was a commodity. Collected from public latrines across a city, it was bought by tanners to treat leather and by launderers to clean clothes. The ammonia in it did the job. Emperor Vespasian saw a revenue stream. He placed a tax on every collector who bought urine from public latrines. His son Titus was offended. He told his father it was beneath Rome's dignity to profit from something so vulgar. Vespasian held up a coin and asked, "Does this smell?" Titus said no. Vespasian smiled. And yet it comes from urine. The line became one of the most quoted in Roman history. Suetonius recorded it. The phrase it inspired, pecunia non olet, money does not smell, is still used in Latin today. What Vespasian understood, and what governments have never forgotten, is this. It does not matter what you tax. It only matters that people need it badly enough to keep paying. Tax number 2. The window tax. England, 1696. In 1696, the English government needed a way to measure wealth without complicated accounting. Windows seemed like a fair proxy. More windows meant a bigger house. A bigger house meant more money. Parliament introduced a tiered window tax. Houses with fewer windows paid a base house rate. Houses with 10 or more windows faced additional charges on top of that. The more glass you had, the more you owed. The response was immediate and entirely predictable. People bricked up their windows. Wealthy homeowners redesigned facades. Architects built new properties with as few openings as possible. Entire neighborhoods became darker. Ventilation dropped. Doctors of the period linked the tax directly to the spread of respiratory illness. The bricked-up outlines of those windows are still visible on old buildings across England and Scotland. The tax lasted 156 years. It was repealed in 1851 after critics spent decades calling it a tax on light and air, which is exactly what it was. When you tax something, you get less of it. They taxed windows. People built fewer windows. The government, as always, acted surprised. Tax number 3. The beard tax. Russia, 1698. Peter the Great returned from a tour of Western Europe in 1697, convinced that Russia looked backwards. He wanted Russians to look European, and he was not interested in persuading anyone. Starting in 1698, he launched measures against the beard. Any man who wanted to keep his facial hair had to pay an annual fee to the state. The amount varied by class. Wealthy merchants paid the most. Peasants inside their villages were largely exempt, but paid a small coin each time they entered a city gate. Every taxpayer received a metal token stamped to confirm payment. He carried it at all times. If a government official stopped him and the token was missing, the beard was shaved on the spot. No appeal, no second chance. This was not only a revenue measure. Peter used the tax to reshape what Russia looked like. Financial force in service of cultural engineering. The tax worked in the sense that beards became rarer in Russian cities. Whether that made Russia more European is a different question entirely. Tax number 4. The brick tax. England, 1784. In 1784, England taxed bricks. The logic made sense on paper. Bricks meant construction. Construction meant economic activity. Tax the bricks. The rate was set per unit. Every brick counted. Builders responded within months. If bricks were taxed by the number, the solution was obvious. Make the bricks bigger. The same wall required fewer bricks. Fewer bricks meant less tax. And so brick sizes across England grew noticeably in the years that followed. The response was so widespread that the government had to introduce a maximum size limit. Builders then started looking at alternative materials, cheaper stone, early concrete, anything outside the brick regime. The tax was finally repealed in 1850 after decades of criticism for distorting construction practices across the country. Every tax is a puzzle handed to people who are very good at solving puzzles. The government rarely anticipates how creative those solutions will be. Tax number 5. The hat tax. England, 1784. The same year England taxed bricks, it taxed hats. Every hat sold in Britain required an official revenue stamp. Retailers had to register as licensed dealers. The stamp was placed inside the hat, visible when the brim was lifted. The rate was graduated. Cheaper hats paid less, expensive hats paid more. Forging a hat tax stamp carried the death penalty. The death penalty for a label inside a hat. The law said clearly, counterfeiting the stamp was a capital offense. Whether that threat was carried out consistently is debated, but it was written into the legislation. The tax ran for 27 years. It was abolished in 1811, in part because the machinery required to enforce it had grown almost comically disproportionate to what it was actually collecting. There is always a point where the cost of making people comply exceeds the value of what you're taking from them. England found that point with hats. Tax number 6, the shield tax, medieval England, 12th century. In medieval England, every knight owed the king military service. When the king went to war, knights were expected to show up. Starting under Henry II in the 12th century, knights who preferred not to fight could pay a fee instead. The payment was called scutage, from the Latin word for shield. Some historians have called it, with a certain dark humor, the cowardice tax. In practice, the arrangement had a certain logic. A knight who didn't want to fight was unlikely to be effective on a battlefield anyway. Henry II took the money and used it to hire professional soldiers who actually wanted to be there. His mercenary armies were often more reliable than reluctant feudal levies. But the system had a structural problem. Over time, the crown began charging scutage even in years with no military campaign. It stopped being an alternative to service. It became a regular tax. Then, some kings began demanding both the payment and the service. What started as an opt-out became simply another obligation stacked on top of the original one. The voluntary exception quietly became compulsory revenue. The mechanism changed. The extraction did not stop. Tax number 7, the livestock emissions tax, Denmark, 2024. 2,000 years after Rome taxed urine, Denmark made history. In 2024, the Danish government agreed to become the first country in the world to tax the greenhouse gas emissions produced by livestock. Starting in 2030, farmers will pay a fee on the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions of their cattle, pigs, and sheep. The rate starts at 300 Danish kroner per ton of emissions, rising significantly by 2035. The stated goal is environmental. Livestock produce methane. Denmark has emissions targets it intends to meet. The math, at least on paper, made sense to the people who designed it. Danish farmers responded immediately. They pointed out that Danish food production would become less competitive than farms in neighboring countries, that the cows would not disappear, they would simply move across the border and the emissions would continue elsewhere, untracked. The structure of the argument was ancient. Tax something, the activity shifts or adapts. The stated problem does not disappear, a new set of problems appears alongside it. From Roman latrines to Danish farms, separated by 2,000 years of history, the shape of the story remains the same. Find something people need, do, or produce. Attach a price to it, watch what happens next. Only the smell changes. 7 taxes across 3,000 years. Rome taxed what people had to throw away. England bricked its own windows to avoid paying for them. Peter the Great tried to shave a civilization into a different shape. Brick builders made bricks the size of small boulders. A forged hat label could get you executed. Medieval knights paid to stay home from wars that sometimes never happened. And Denmark is currently taxing a biological process that cows have no opinion about. The methods have changed, the pattern has not. When someone holds the power to decide what gets taxed and what does not, they will always find new things to add to the list. The only question that matters is this: what will people find a way to do next? If this made your own tax bill feel slightly more historical, share it with someone who pays too many of them. And subscribe, because next week we're looking at the countries that tried to ban something and ended up with the exact opposite of what they wanted.